He hasn't performed for years. My name's Jonathan Walker. I'm 46 years old, and I'd been managing client relationships at Ironwood Forge for 8 years when my boss, Bradley Fletcher, said those words to Human Resources. Can you believe someone could lie so boldly to destroy a career? I sat there in the conference room in Phoenix, Arizona, watching him slide falsified performance reports across the mahogany table like he was dealing cards in a rigged game. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while Bradley painted me as dead weight. 8 years of building relationships, securing contracts, keeping clients happy. 8 years of working weekends, taking calls at midnight, making sure Ironwood Forge's manufacturing clients felt like family. Bradley made it sound like I'd been collecting paychecks for showing up late and leaving early. These reports clearly demonstrate a pattern of declining performance, Bradley continued, his voice steady as granite. The Human Resources Director, a woman named Patricia Young, nodded along like she was watching a nature documentary. Missed deadlines, client complaints, failure to meet revenue targets. Every word was a lie, but I kept my mouth shut. Patricia flipped through the papers, her reading glasses perched on her nose. This is concerning, Jonathan. The documentation shows consistent underperformance over the past 18 months. I knew what those papers said because I'd seen my real performance reviews. The ones locked in Bradley's office showed a different story. Client retention rates at 96%. Revenue targets exceeded by 30% each quarter. Personal relationships that had secured exclusive manufacturing contracts worth $12 million annually. I understand, I said quietly. Bradley's eyebrows lifted slightly. He'd probably expected me to fight back, to demand explanations, to threaten lawsuits. Instead, I just sat there, hands folded on the table, watching him dig his own grave. Did he really think he could erase my contributions so easily? Stay tuned to Jake's Revenge to find out how this unfolds. Given the severity of these performance issues, we have no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately, Patricia announced. She pushed a folder toward me. Your final paycheck, benefits information, and a severance package. I opened the folder. 2 weeks' pay. After 8 years of generating more revenue than any other account manager in the company's history. Thank you, I said, standing up. I'll clean out my office. Bradley shook my hand at the door. His palm was damp with sweat, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Nothing personal, Jonathan. Just business. Of course, I replied. As I walked toward my office, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. 38% of Ironwood Forge's total revenue came from clients who called me directly, who trusted me personally, who'd followed me through 3 different companies over the past 15 years. Bradley had just fired the one person who stood between the company and financial disaster. He didn't know it yet, but the clock was already ticking. Subscribe to Jake's Revenge to see how I turned the tables. I'd started at Ironwood Forge as a junior account manager when the company was struggling to compete with larger manufacturing firms. The founders, 2 brothers named Stephen and David Ironwood, had built their reputation on quality metalwork, but couldn't seem to break into the major contracts that would secure their future. That's where I came in. My background wasn't in manufacturing. I'd spent my 20s in construction, learning how different materials behaved under stress, understanding what contractors needed before they knew they needed it. When I transitioned into sales, I brought something most account managers didn't have. I actually understood what our clients were building. The first major contract I landed was with Westfield Construction, a company that needed custom steel frameworks for a series of high-rise projects. Instead of just quoting prices, I spent 3 days on their job sites, watching their crews work, identifying bottlenecks in their supply chain. When I presented our proposal, it wasn't just about steel beams. It was about delivery schedules that matched their construction timeline, quality specifications that would pass inspection on the first try, and pricing that made their bids competitive. That contract led to others. Westfield recommended us to Morrison Engineering. Morrison introduced us to their network of contractors. Within 2 years, I'd built relationships that generated millions in revenue. Bradley Fletcher joined the company 3 years later as my supervisor. fresh from business school, full of theories about customer relationship management and strategic partnerships. He spent his first 6 months trying to convince me to use his new software systems for tracking client communications. "You can't run a business on handshake deals and personal relationships," he'd say. "We need data. We need metrics." I kept my mouth shut and kept bringing in contracts. The warning signs started 18 months ago. Bradley began scheduling client meetings without inviting me. He'd call it executive-level relationship building and assure me that my day-to-day account management was still valued. Then he started copying himself on all my client communications, claiming it was for transparency and oversight. Last year, during our annual review process, Bradley asked me to prepare detailed reports on each of my client relationships, contact histories, contract renewal dates, decision-maker profiles, competitive positioning. He called it institutional knowledge preservation. I should have known what he was planning. The signs were there. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into his office. Meetings with the Ironwood brothers that suddenly became confidential strategy sessions instead of team updates. Client contracts being renewed with subtle changes to the terms that I only discovered by accident. Bradley had been building a case against me while simultaneously preparing to take credit for my work. He documented every client relationship I'd built, every process I developed, every competitive advantage I created. Then he'd falsified performance reports to make it look like I was the problem. Now he'd have to manage those relationships himself. The realization hit me while I was packing my office. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. I was loading files into a cardboard box when my phone buzzed with a text from Robert Chen at Westfield Construction. "Hey Jonathan, got a weird call from your boss today. Something about transitioning account management. What's going on?" Then another text. This one from Lisa Morrison. "Bradley Fletcher just introduced himself as our new primary contact. Did you get promoted?" And another from Tony Rodriguez at Phoenix Steel. "Some guy named Bradley called about renewing our contract. Told him I only work with you. Should I be concerned?" I sat down heavily in my chair and looked around the office I'd occupied for 8 years. Photos with clients at job site groundbreakings. Thank you cards from contractors whose projects had finished ahead of schedule. A plaque from the Arizona Construction Alliance recognizing Ironwood Forge as Supplier of the Year for 3 consecutive years. Bradley thought he could slide into my relationships like changing drivers on a highway. He had my client files, my contact lists, my documented processes. What he didn't have was 8 years of building trust, one conversation at a time. I picked up my phone and started making calls. "Robert, it's Jonathan Walker. I need to let you know that I'm no longer with Ironwood Forge." "What? Why?" "We've got 4 projects starting next month. I understand you'll be working with Bradley Fletcher going forward. He's very capable." I kept my voice neutral. "I just wanted to thank you for all the business over the years." A long pause. "Jonathan, you've saved our ass more times than I can count. If you're not there, we need to talk about our options." I made the same call to Lisa Morrison, to Tony Rodriguez, to every major client I'd worked with over the past 8 years. I didn't badmouth Bradley or Ironwood Forge. I didn't try to poison the well. I simply informed them of the change and thanked them for their business. By the time I finished the last call, my phone had 14 missed calls from Bradley. That night, I sat in my apartment with a beer and a legal pad, writing down everything I knew about Ironwood Forge's client relationships. Not the information in my files, but the real knowledge that couldn't be documented. Which clients were considering expanding their operations? Which ones were unhappy with their current suppliers? Which contracts were coming up for renewal, and what it would take to keep them? Bradley had the paperwork, but relationships aren't paperwork. I opened my laptop and started typing a resignation letter that I'd never send, just to get my thoughts in order. By midnight, I had something better, a business plan. The phone rang. Bradley's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail and went to bed. Tomorrow, I'd start building something new. 3 weeks after my termination, I got a call from Stephen Ironwood. "Jonathan, I need to understand what happened here," he said. His voice was tight, frustrated. "Bradley showed me your performance reports, but our numbers don't make sense." I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, reviewing business plans for the consulting firm I was planning to launch. "What kind of numbers, Mr. Ironwood?" "Revenue numbers, client retention. Bradley said you'd been underperforming, but we've had 6 contract cancellations since you left. Morrison Engineering terminated their agreement yesterday. Said they couldn't work with anyone except you." I sipped my coffee and chose my words carefully. Bradley has access to all my client files. He should be able to maintain those relationships. That's what he keeps telling me, but the phone calls I'm getting suggest otherwise. Robert Westfield called this morning, said Bradley doesn't understand their project timelines and quoted them prices that make no sense. Stephen Ironwood wasn't asking me to come back. Not yet. He was fishing for information, trying to understand why his company was hemorrhaging clients. I could have told him exactly what was happening. Bradley had my contact list and contract histories, but he'd never actually managed a client relationship. He'd been a supervisor, not a salesman. He could read reports about what clients needed, but he couldn't anticipate problems before they happened or adjust proposals based on subtle changes in project requirements. "I'm sorry to hear about the contract cancellations," I said. "Jonathan, level with me. Did Bradley fabricate those performance reports?" There it was, the question I'd been waiting for. Stephen Ironwood was smart enough to recognize that something didn't add up, but he was also cautious enough to ask for confirmation before making accusations. "I think you should review my actual client files," I said. "Not the performance summaries Bradley prepared, but the original contract documentation. Check the revenue attribution for each account." A long pause. "I'll do that, Mr. Ironwood. I appreciate the call, but I'm moving forward with my own plans. I've got meetings with potential clients next week." "What kind of clients?" "The kind that needs someone who understands their business." I closed my laptop. "Take care of yourself." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Hayes, who specialized in employment law. "Jennifer, I need you to prepare a wrongful termination case, but don't file it yet." "What's the timeline?" "Give me 60 days. If Ironwood Forge doesn't implode on its own, we'll help it along." That afternoon, Bradley called me directly for the first time since my termination. "Jonathan, we need to talk about this situation with the clients. Some of them are being difficult about the transition." I almost laughed. Difficult, like it was their fault for expecting competent service. "What kind of difficulties?" "Morrison Engineering is threatening to terminate their contract. They're claiming I don't understand their specifications, but I've reviewed all your files. I have the same information you had." "Information isn't relationships, Bradley. Look, I know we had our differences, but maybe you could help smooth this transition. Talk to Robert Westfield. Convince him to give me a chance. I don't work for Ironwood Forge anymore. I could arrange a consulting fee, something unofficial." Now, I did laugh. "You fired me for non-performance, and now you want to pay me to fix your problems. The company is going through a rough patch. We all need to work together. I am working, just not for you." I hung up and immediately called Robert Westfield. "Robert, it's Jonathan Walker. I wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week." "Jonathan, thank God. This Bradley guy is driving me crazy. He quoted us 40% higher than our usual rate and wants to change our delivery schedule." "What kind of delivery schedule?" "Monthly shipments instead of weekly. Says it's more efficient for inventory management." I shook my head. Bradley was trying to optimize for Ironwood Forge's convenience instead of understanding that Westfield needed weekly deliveries to maintain their construction timeline. "Robert, I'm starting my own consulting firm. I'd like to discuss representing your material procurement needs." "You mean finding us a new supplier?" I mean finding you the right supplier for each project. Sometimes that might be Ironwood Forge. Sometimes it might be someone else. When can we meet? 2 months after my termination, I received a call from Patricia Young in Human Resources. Jonathan, I need to ask you some questions about your employment at Ironwood Forge. I was in my new office, a small space I'd rented in downtown Phoenix while building my consulting practice. 3 clients so far, all former Ironwood Forge customers who'd followed me to independent representation. What kind of questions, Patricia? The kind that could result in legal action against the company. Her voice was strained. I've been reviewing your employment file in response to some complaints we've received. Complaints from clients and from the Ironwood brothers. They're claiming that Bradley Fletcher provided falsified performance documentation when we terminated your employment. I leaned back in my chair. Finally, I found discrepancies between the performance reports Bradley submitted and the actual client revenue data. Significant discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? According to our financial records, you were personally responsible for 38% of total company revenue over the past 3 years. Bradley's reports claimed you were underperforming and costing the company money. 38%. I'd known my accounts were valuable, but I'd never calculated the exact percentage. Bradley had fired the employee who generated more than a third of the company's revenue. Patricia, I documented all my client relationships and contract details. Those files should still be available. That's part of the problem. Some of those files have been altered. Contract attribution has been changed to show Bradley as the primary account manager. Client communication logs have been edited. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Bradley hadn't just falsified performance reports. He'd been systematically rewriting history to position himself as the architect of my success. When did these changes occur? The digital timestamps show modifications over the past 18 months. Always during evening hours or weekends when Bradley would have had private access to the system. 18 months. The same time frame when Bradley had started inserting himself into my client relationships and asking for detailed documentation of my processes. Patricia, I need you to understand something. Those clients didn't choose Ironwood Forge because of competitive pricing or superior technology. They chose us because of personal relationships built over years of reliable service. Bradley can't replicate that by changing computer files. I'm beginning to understand that. She paused. The company has lost 47% of its revenue since your termination. We're facing potential bankruptcy within 6 months. 47%. Worse than I'd expected. What do the Ironwood brothers want? They want to offer you your job back with Bradley as your supervisor. Bradley Fletcher is no longer with the company. I sat up straight. As of when? As of this morning, terminated for falsifying employment records and fraudulent documentation. I looked out my office window at the Phoenix skyline, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Bradley's arrogance, his assumption that relationships were just data points to be managed, his willingness to destroy someone else's career to advance his own. Patricia, I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested in returning to Ironwood Forge. The brothers are prepared to offer significant compensation, double your previous salary. I'm building my own business now. Jonathan, please consider it. The company won't survive without those client relationships. I thought about Stephen and David Ironwood. 2 decent men who'd built something valuable only to watch it nearly destroyed by an employee they trusted. They didn't deserve to lose their company because of Bradley's fraud. Patricia, I'll consider a consulting arrangement, not employment. Consulting? What would that involve? First, we discuss my rate. Then we discuss exactly what the company is willing to do to rebuild trust with the clients Bradley drove away. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in November. Bradley Fletcher's name on my caller ID. I'd been expecting it for weeks. Ironwood Forge's third-quarter earnings had been released, showing a 62% revenue decline compared to the previous year. The industry publications were calling it a case study in management failure. My consulting business was thriving, representing 15 former Ironwood Forge clients and helping them navigate relationships with multiple suppliers. "Hello, Bradley." Jonathan, his voice was tight, desperate. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About this situation. About what you're doing to the company." I was sitting in my office, reviewing a proposal for a new client who wanted help negotiating a major contract with a steel supplier. Through my window, I could see construction crews working on a high-rise project managed by Westfield Construction and supplied by Morrison Engineering. Both companies were now clients of my consulting firm. "I'm not doing anything to the company, Bradley. I'm running my own business. You're stealing our clients. I'm representing clients who chose to work with me. There's a difference. The Ironwood brothers are talking about bankruptcy. 40 people are going to lose their jobs because of what you're doing." I felt a flash of anger, quickly suppressed. 40 people are going to lose their jobs because you falsified performance reports and fired the person who generated 38% of the company's revenue. That's not what happened. Really? Because I have copies of the falsified documents you submitted to Human Resources. I also have the original client files showing revenue attribution before you altered them. A long silence. "What do you want, Jonathan?" "I want you to admit what you did." "I was protecting the company. Your relationship-based approach wasn't scalable. We needed systems, processes, documented procedures. You needed to take credit for someone else's work. Look, the company is in trouble. Real trouble. The Ironwood brothers are considering a bankruptcy filing. They've asked me to reach out to you." I almost laughed. "They asked you, the person they fired for fraud." "I'm working as a consultant now, helping with transition planning." "What kind of transition planning? Asset liquidation? Client relationship transfers?" "They want to know if you'd be willing to facilitate client communications during the dissolution process." "For what compensation?" "They're prepared to offer you significant terms. Triple your previous salary. Plus a $200,000 signing bonus. Triple salary plus a $200,000 bonus to help salvage the mess Bradley had created." "Bradley, let me explain something. I don't need Ironwood Forge anymore. I have my own business. I represent clients who trust me personally, not because of the company name on my business card. The industry is talking, Jonathan. People know what you're doing. They're calling it revenge. They're calling it business. You're destroying lives. Stephen Ironwood built that company from nothing. David mortgaged his house to keep it running during the recession. They don't deserve this." "You're right. They don't deserve what you did to them." I hung up and immediately called Stephen Ironwood. "Mr. Ironwood, it's Jonathan Walker. I understand Bradley Fletcher called me on your behalf." "Jonathan, we're desperate. The company won't survive another quarter without those client relationships. I'm prepared to help, but not the way Bradley suggested." "What do you mean?" I'm prepared to acquire Ironwood Forge's remaining assets and client contracts, cash purchase, full employment protection for your current staff." "You want to buy the company?" "I want to build something better." The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday at Ironwood Forge's conference room. Stephen and David Ironwood, Patricia Young from Human Resources, their bankruptcy attorney, and Bradley Fletcher, who'd somehow convinced them he should be part of the negotiations. I walked in carrying a single folder and a cashier's check. "Gentlemen, Patricia." I took a seat across from Bradley, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I understand the company is considering my acquisition offer." Stephen Ironwood looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Stress lines that hadn't been there 8 months ago. "Jonathan, we appreciate your interest, but the terms you're proposing are unprecedented." "Which terms specifically?" "Full employment protection, assumption of all current contracts, and a purchase price that exceeds our current market valuation." I opened my folder and pulled out a detailed financial analysis. According to these projections, Ironwood Forge will be profitable within 18 months under competent management. The current difficulties are entirely attributable to management failures, not market conditions. Bradley leaned forward. Jonathan, you can't seriously believe that one person's departure caused all these problems. I looked at him for the first time since entering the room. Bradley, I've spent the past 6 months analyzing exactly what happened here. Would you like me to share my findings? His face went pale. I pulled out a second document. Client retention analysis, revenue attribution by account manager, timeline of contract cancellations correlated with management transitions. I slid the papers across the table. The data tells a very clear story. David Ironwood picked up the papers and started reading. His expression changed as he absorbed the information. This shows that Bradley's falsified reports directly caused the termination of the employee responsible for retaining our most valuable clients. That's correct. Stephen Ironwood looked at Bradley. You told us Jonathan was costing the company money. I had to make difficult decisions, Bradley said. The numbers supported my assessment. What numbers? I pulled out another document. The fabricated performance reports you submitted to Human Resources, or the original client files you altered to remove my name from contract documentation? Bradley stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do. I opened the folder wider. Because Patricia Young has already provided these documents to the Arizona Attorney General's office as evidence of employment fraud. The room went silent. 6 months later, I was standing in the renovated conference room of Walker Manufacturing Solutions, the company I'd built from the assets of the former Ironwood Forge. The same room where Bradley Fletcher had handed me falsified termination papers now hosted weekly strategy meetings with the team of account managers I'd hired to handle our growing client base. Robert Westfield was shaking my hand after finalizing a 3-year exclusive supply contract. Jonathan, I've got to ask. Did you plan all this from the beginning? I smiled and looked around the room. 42 employees, all retained from the original Ironwood Forge, plus 15 new hires to handle expansion. Revenue up 90% from the previous year. Client satisfaction scores higher than ever. I plan to build something better. Through the conference room windows, I could see construction crews working on projects supplied by our materials, managed by our logistics team, supported by relationships built on trust rather than falsified documentation. Bradley Fletcher had faced criminal charges for employment fraud and document falsification, receiving a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation after pleading guilty to avoid jail time. His professional certifications had been revoked. His reputation in the manufacturing industry permanently destroyed, and his attempt to start his own consulting firm had failed when potential clients discovered his history of fraudulent reporting. The Arizona Attorney General's office had used his case to implement new oversight requirements for employment documentation, ensuring his name would forever be associated with one of the most publicized examples of management fraud in state business history. His personal finances had been devastated by legal fees and civil settlements, while his marriage had ended when his wife learned about the systematic deception that had characterized his professional life. I walked to the window and watched the sunset paint the Phoenix sky in shades of gold and red, understanding that authentic relationships and genuine value always triumph over those who mistake manipulation for leadership. Don't miss the next incredible story of justice and triumph. Subscribe to Jake's Revenge for more.